When an 8-year-old girl emerged barefoot from the Montana wilderness asking a broken mountain man for his table scraps, neither of them knew their quiet act of kindness would ignite a legal battle that would shake the foundations of family, bloodlines, and what it truly means to be a father. This is the story of Calder Boone and Ivy Hale, two lost souls who found each other in the loneliest corner of 1880s Montana, built a family from ashes and hope, then had to fight heaven and earth to keep it. Stay with me until the very end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Montana Territory in 1880 was a land that didn't forgive weakness. It stretched endlessly under skies so vast they made a man feel like dust, and winters so brutal they could freeze hope itself solid in your chest. Towns were few and scattered, raw collections of timber and ambition clinging to mountainsides and riverbeds. Out here, the wilderness didn't just surround you, it claimed you, it tested you, and if you weren't careful, it swallowed you whole. Calder Boone had been swallowed years ago. His cabin sat 12 miles north of the nearest settlement, a place called Redwood Ridge, though settlement was generous. Redwood Ridge was little more than a trading post, a blacksmith, a crooked saloon, and a church that only saw a congregation twice a month when the circuit preacher rolled through. Calder's land bordered the dense pine forest that climbed toward the Rockies, a stretch of wilderness so thick with shadow and silence that even trappers avoided it after dark. The cabin itself was small but solid. Calder had built it with his own hands 15 years prior, back when the world still made sense. Back when he'd had a wife who sang while she kneaded bread, and two daughters whose laughter could chase away any storm. The structure was simple: one main room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft above, and a covered porch that faced west toward the mountains. He'd carved their initials into the doorframe the day they'd moved in: CB, MB, LB, RB. Calder, Mary, Lily, Rose. Now only his remained. The fever had come in the winter of 1875, swift and merciless as a wolf pack. It took Rose first. She was only 4, her body too small to fight. Lily followed 3 days later, delirious and calling for her mama. Mary held on the longest, whispering to Calder even as the light left her eyes, "Don't let the cold take you too, Cal. Promise me." He'd promised, but he'd lied. Not the kind of cold she meant, the kind that froze your blood and stopped your heart. No, Calder survived that winter and everyone after. But the cold that settled into his soul was something deeper, something permanent. He stopped going to town except when supplies ran low. He stopped speaking except to his horse. He stopped living, really, in any way that mattered. He chopped wood, hunted game, tended a small vegetable patch, and sat on that porch every evening watching the sun sink behind the peaks. Waiting. For what? He couldn't say. The townspeople had tried at first. Widow Paulson brought casseroles. Reverend Michaels offered prayers and scripture. Even rough old Tom Bridger, the trapper who lived 8 miles east, stopped by with whiskey and silence, the kind of comfort one broken man offers another. But Calder had turned them all away, polite but firm. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want company. He wanted to be left alone with his ghosts. 5 years passed like that. 5 winters of snow and silence. 5 summers of empty rooms and unanswered echoes. The cabin grew dustier, the garden smaller. Calder's beard grew long and shot through with gray, though he was only 37. His hands stayed strong, work kept them that way, but his eyes went hollow. Folks in Redwood Ridge started calling him the hermit behind his back, though never to his face. There was something in Calder Boone that still commanded respect, even in ruin. And then came the evening of August 14th, 1880. The sun was setting in shades of amber and rose, painting the pine trees in gold. Calder sat on his porch in the old rocking chair he'd made for Mary, a tin cup of lukewarm coffee resting on the railing beside him. Supper had been simple: fried trout, hard bread, canned beans, and he'd eaten it mechanically, tasting nothing. His plate sat on the porch step, mostly empty except for a heel of bread and some bean juice. He was just reaching for his coffee when he saw her. At first he thought it was a deer, something small and pale moving through the tall grass at the edge of the clearing. But then the shape stood upright, and Calder's hand froze halfway to his cup. It was a child, a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, dressed in a thin, faded dress that had once been blue but was now closer to gray. Her feet were bare and dirty, her arms thin as kindling. Dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her face, small, hollow-cheeked, smudged with trail dust, carried an expression Calder recognized all too well. Hunger, exhaustion, and something deeper, loneliness. She walked slowly, cautiously, like a wild animal approaching a campfire. Her eyes never left Calder's face. When she reached the edge of the porch, she stopped, clasping her hands in front of her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried over the evening breeze, she said, "Mister, I don't mean to bother you, but could I please have your leftovers?" Calder stared. Children didn't wander out this far. Not alone, not on foot, not unless something had gone terribly wrong. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, his voice rusty from disuse. "Redwood Ridge, sir." She swayed slightly as if standing upright took all her remaining strength. "I've been walking since morning." 12 miles? "Yes, sir." "Who's with you?" "Nobody, sir." Calder's jaw tightened. "Where's your folks?" The girl's eyes dropped to the dirt. "Dead, sir. Both of 'em. Fever took my mama 2 winters back. My pa, he got caught in a mine collapse last spring." "So who's looking after you?" "Nobody now." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My aunt and uncle took me in for a while, but they said they couldn't afford another mouth. Told me to find work or find somewhere else to be." Calder felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 5 years. "How long since you ate?" 2 days, I think. Maybe 3. I lose track." He looked down at the plate on the step. A heel of bread, cold beans. Nothing fit for a starving child, but more than she had. "Wait here," he said quietly, and stood. The girl's eyes widened. I don't need much, mister. Just the scraps. I don't want to be a bother." But Calder was already inside. He moved through the cabin like a man in a dream. From the cupboard, he pulled a clean plate, one that hadn't been used in years. He sliced bread, thick and fresh from the loaf he'd baked that morning. He ladled beans into a bowl, added a chunk of butter, heated it over the fire until it was steaming. He fried 2 more pieces of trout, golden and crisp. He poured a cup of cool water from the pitcher. When he stepped back onto the porch, the girl was still standing exactly where he'd left her, trembling slightly. Calder set the plate and cup on the step. "Sit," he said. She hesitated, her eyes darting between the food and his face, as if waiting for the trap to spring. "Go on," Calder said, softer this time. "It's yours." Slowly, carefully, she sank down onto the step. She picked up the bread with shaking hands and took a bite, and the sound she made, a tiny, broken whimper of relief, nearly shattered Calder where he stood. She ate like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like. She ate with tears streaming down her face, silent and steady. She ate until the plate was clean and the cup was empty, and when she was finished, she set them down gently and whispered, "Thank you, mister." Calder cleared his throat. "What's your name?" "Ivy, sir. Ivy Hale." "Ivy." He let the name settle. "You planning to walk back to town tonight?" She looked out at the darkening woods, and fear flickered across her face. I don't know, sir. I don't have anywhere to go back to." "Can't stay out here alone. Wolves, bears, worse." "I know." Her voice was so small. "But I don't know what else to do." Calder stood there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, warring with himself. Every instinct screamed at him to send her away, to stay locked in his solitude. He'd survived 5 years by feeling nothing, needing no one. This girl was a complication he couldn't afford. But then she looked up at him with those wide, desperate eyes, eyes that held the same aching emptiness he saw every morning in the mirror. And the war inside him ended. "There's a blanket inside," he heard himself say, "and a pallet by the fire. You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next." Ivy's face transformed. Hope, fragile and disbelieving, bloomed across her features. "Really? Really?" She stood, brushing dirt from her dress. I won't be any trouble, mister. I promise. I can work. I can help with chores. I won't eat much. Ivy. She stopped. You already helped, Calder said quietly. By asking. He didn't explain what he meant. He wasn't sure he could. That first night, Calder gave Ivy a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender, Mary's scent, and made up a pallet of old quilts near the fireplace. Ivy curled into it like a kitten, her eyes already heavy. Mister? She whispered, just before sleep claimed her. Yeah? What's your name? Calder. Calder Boone. Thank you, Mr. Boone. Just Calder. Okay. A pause. Good night, Calder. Good night, Ivy. He stayed awake long after her breathing evened out, sitting in Mary's rocking chair, staring into the fire. For the first time in 5 years, the silence in the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a question. Morning came soft and golden. Calder woke to the smell of coffee he hadn't made, and sat bolt upright in the loft. Below, he heard the quiet clatter of dishes, the scrape of the iron stove door. He climbed down the ladder and stopped cold. Ivy stood at the stove, barely tall enough to reach the top, stirring a pot of oatmeal. She'd pulled her hair back with a piece of twine and rolled up the sleeves of her too-big dress. The fire was stoked, the table was set, the floor had been swept. She turned when she heard him, and her face lit up with nervous pride. I hope it's okay, she said quickly. I found the oats in the cupboard, and I know how to cook 'em. My mama taught me. And I swept and I fed the chickens. I hope that was all right. I just thought, Ivy? She stopped, biting her lip. Calder looked around the cabin, at the order, the care, the life humming in corners that had been dead for years. You didn't have to do all this, he said. I wanted to. Her voice was earnest. You fed me. You gave me a place to sleep. I wanted to pay you back, I guess. Calder crossed to the table and sat down heavily. Ivy ladled oatmeal into a bowl and set it in front of him, along with a spoon and a cup of coffee. Then she served herself a much smaller portion and sat across from him, watching. He took a bite. It was perfect. Your mama taught you well, he said. Ivy's smile could have powered the sun. They ate in companionable quiet, and when they were finished, Ivy immediately started clearing the dishes. Calder watched her work, efficient, careful, humming under her breath, and felt the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Ivy? He said. She turned, soapy hands dripping. What happens when you go back to town? Her face fell. I don't know. Maybe I can find work at the boarding house, or the saloon, washing dishes, or... You're 8 years old. I'm 9 next month. Still, Calder leaned back in his chair. That's no life for a kid. It's the only life I got, Calder. The resignation in her voice, so adult, so weary, hit him like a fist. He thought of Rose, of Lily, of the daughters who'd never have a chance to grow up. And he thought of this girl who'd walked 12 miles on bare feet just to ask for scraps, who'd woken before dawn to cook and clean for a stranger. What am I doing? The question rose unbidden. What am I doing, locked up here, wasting the years I've got left? Mary wouldn't want this. The girls wouldn't want this. What if you stayed? The words left his mouth before his brain caught up. Ivy froze. What? Here. With me. Just for a while. Until we figure something better out. You mean it? Calder met her eyes. I mean it. Ivy's face crumpled, and she started crying, not sad tears, but the kind that came from relief so overwhelming it had nowhere else to go. She ran around the table and threw her arms around Calder's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Calder's arms came up slowly, awkwardly, and wrapped around her small frame. She weighed almost nothing. She smelled like wood smoke and soap and childhood. And for the first time in 5 years, Calder Boone let himself hold on. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Ivy woke before dawn and started the fire. Calder made coffee and fried eggs. They ate together, talking little but comfortably. Then the work began. Ivy proved herself surprisingly capable. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, swept floors, mended clothes, and helped in the garden. Calder taught her how to chop kindling safely, how to tend the vegetable patch, how to read the sky for weather. She absorbed everything with fierce concentration, determined to prove her worth. At night, after supper, they'd sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge. Ivy asked questions about the mountains, the animals, the way the world worked, and Calder found himself answering, his voice growing stronger with each passing evening. One night, about a week in, Ivy looked up at him and said, "Calder? Yeah? Why do you live out here all alone?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Calder was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he said, "I had a family once, a wife, 2 daughters." Ivy's eyes widened. "Where are they?" "Gone. Fever took 'em. 5 years ago." "Oh." Ivy's voice went soft. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She was quiet then. "Is that why you let me stay? Because you miss them?" Calder looked at her, really looked, at her earnest face, her hopeful eyes, her small hands folded in her lap. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe you needed someone, and I needed someone to need me. Either way, I'm glad you knocked on my door, Ivy Hale." Ivy smiled, slow and trembling. "Me too." What? 2 weeks became 3. 3 became 4. Ivy flourished. Color returned to her cheeks. Her laughter, tentative at first, grew bolder. She planted a small flower garden near the porch, singing while she worked. She learned to ride Calder's old mare, Clover, and took to brushing her every evening, whispering secrets into the horse's ear. Calder, too, began to change. He smiled more, spoke more, started repairing things he'd let fall into disrepair. The porch railing, the chicken coop door, the loft ladder. He even rode into town for supplies, enduring the shocked stares of the townsfolk who hadn't seen him in months. "That you, Boone?" Tom Bridger called from outside the trading post. "Thought you turned into a ghost." "Still here," Calder said. "What brings you down?" "Need sugar and fabric and some other things." Tom's eyebrows rose. "Fabric? You taken up sewing? For the girl?" "What girl?" "Ivy. She's staying with me." Word spread through Redwood Ridge like wildfire. By the time Calder left the trading post, half the town knew. Widow Paulson cornered him outside the church. "Is it true?" she demanded. "You've taken in a child." "Yes, ma'am." "That little Hale girl, the one whose kin turned her out?" "That's right." Widow Paulson's stern face softened. "Well, good. That child deserves better than what she got. You make sure she's fed proper, you hear?" "I intend to." Reverend Michaels appeared, smiling. "Calder, I heard the news. This is wonderful, truly." "It's temporary," Calder said quickly. "Just until—" "Of course," the Reverend said, though his eyes said he didn't believe it for a second. "Still, if you need anything, clothes, books, help, you let us know." Calder nodded, unsure what to say. On the ride home, supplies packed on Clover's back, he found himself thinking, temporary. Was it? Could it be? Basit. The answer came one evening in late September. Calder was chopping wood behind the cabin when he heard Ivy scream. He dropped the axe and ran. She was in the garden, frozen, staring at something in the dirt. Calder reached her in seconds, scanning for danger. Snake, wolf, anything. "What is it?" he demanded. Ivy pointed, trembling. There, pushing up through the soil, was a tiny green sprout. A flower. She'd planted seeds 2 weeks ago, seeds Calder had bought her in town. And now, against all odds, one had taken root. "It grew," Ivy whispered, awed. "Calder, it grew." And then she turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and said, "I've never grown anything before. I've never stayed anywhere long enough." Calder knelt beside her, his own throat tight. "Well," he said quietly, "you're here now, and you'll be here to see it bloom." Ivy looked at him, eyes shining. "Promise?" Calder thought of Mary, of Lily and Rose, of the years he'd wasted in grief. And he thought of this girl, This fierce, fragile, beautiful girl who'd walked out of the wilderness and asked for scraps, and somehow given him back his life. "Promise," he said. Ivy threw her arms around him, and Calder held her close, the Montana sun warm on his shoulders. For the first time in 5 years, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. That night, after Ivy had gone to bed, Calder sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pen. He wasn't good with words, but he did his best. "Dear Reverend Michaels, I'm writing to ask about the process for legal guardianship. Ivy Hale is staying with me, and I'd like to make it official. She deserves a home, and I think I can be that for her. Please let me know what I need to do. Calder Boone." He sealed the letter and set it by the door to take to town the next day. When he climbed into the loft and lay down, he could hear Ivy breathing softly below, safe and warm by the fire. And for the first time in 5 years, Calder Boone fell asleep smiling. The letter sat on the table for 3 days before Calder worked up the nerve to ride into town. It wasn't fear exactly. Calder Boone wasn't a man who scared easily. But putting words to paper, making his intentions official, felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. For 5 years, he'd lived in the safe territory of grief and solitude. Now he was choosing something else. Something bigger. Something that could break him all over again if it went wrong. But every morning, when Ivy smiled at him over breakfast, every evening when she sat beside him on the porch humming songs her mother had taught her, every night when she whispered "Good night" Calder before sleep claimed her, all of it reinforced one undeniable truth. He couldn't let her go. On the 4th day, a cold October morning with frost silvering the grass, Calder saddled Clover and tucked the letter into his coat pocket. "I'm riding to town," he told Ivy, who was feeding the chickens. "Need anything?" She thought for a moment, her face serious. "Could you get more seeds? I want to plant something that'll bloom in spring." "What kind?" "Surprise me." Her grin was mischievous. "I trust you." Those 3 words hit Calder square in the chest. "I trust you." "I'll see what I can find," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Be safe, Calder." "Always am." As he rode down the trail, he glanced back once. Ivy stood in the yard, one hand shading her eyes, waving. The cabin behind her looked different now, smoke curling from the chimney, laundry on the line, flower beds marking the edges of the porch. It looked like a home again, because of her. Calder turned Clover toward Redwood Ridge and didn't look back again. The town was busier than usual. Wagons lined Main Street, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. Calder tied Clover outside the church and found Reverend Michaels in his small office, bent over a Bible with reading glasses perched on his nose. "Calder," the Reverend said, looking up with genuine pleasure. "Good to see you. How's young Ivy?" "Thriving," Calder said simply. He pulled the letter from his pocket. "I need your help with something." Reverend Michaels read the letter slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like pride. "You want to adopt her," he said. "Guardian, technically. I know adoption's complicated, but guardianship would give her stability. A name. Protection." "It would," the Reverend agreed. "But Calder, this isn't a simple process. There'll be questions, interviews. The territorial judge will need to approve it, and if Ivy has any living relatives who could contest, she doesn't. Her aunt and uncle made it clear they don't want her. Then we'll need them to state that in writing. We'll need character witnesses for you. We'll need proof that you can provide for her." The Reverend set the letter down. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you. This could take months. I don't care how long it takes. And if it doesn't go in your favor," Calder's jaw tightened, "then I'll keep fighting until it does." Reverend Michaels studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Mary would be proud of you." The words landed like a benediction. "I hope so," Calder said quietly. "I'll write to Judge Farrow in Helena. He handles these cases. Meanwhile, I'll start gathering testimonies. Tom Bridger will vouch for you. He's always spoken well of your character. Widow Paulson, too. We'll build a strong case." "Thank you, Reverend." "Thank you, Calder. That little girl deserves someone who fights for her, and you deserve another chance at family." Calder nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and left before emotion could get the better of him. He stopped at the trading post next, where Mrs. Chen greeted him with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Boone, what can I get you?" "Flower seeds, something that blooms in spring." Her eyebrows rose. "For the girl?" Word really did travel fast in small towns. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Chen's stern face softened. She disappeared into the back and returned with 3 small paper packets. "Wildflowers. They're hardy, and they'll fill your whole yard with color come April. On the house." "I can pay—" "Consider it a gift for Ivy." Calder accepted them, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or belonging. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Tom Bridger pushed through the door, nearly colliding with him. "Boone! Just the man I wanted to see." Tom's weathered face was alight with something Calder couldn't quite read. "Heard from the Reverend you're making things official with the girl." "Trying to." "Good. She's a fine kid. Smart, too. I saw her in town last week helping Widow Paulson carry groceries. Didn't ask for a thing, just did it because it needed doing. That's good character." "She is good," Calder agreed. "Better than I deserve." "Horseshit," Tom said bluntly. "You gave her a home when nobody else would. That makes you exactly what she deserves." He clapped Calder on the shoulder. "You need anything, testimony, supplies, someone to stand with you, you let me know." "I will." "And Boone?" Tom's expression grew serious. "Don't let anybody tell you blood's the only thing that makes family. Love matters more. Remember that." Calder nodded, throat tight, and headed back to Clover. The ride home felt different, lighter somehow, as if the future he'd been afraid to want was finally taking shape. Durset. When he reached the cabin, Ivy was on the porch scrubbing the table. "You're back." She dropped the brush and ran to meet him. "Did you get the seeds?" Calder handed her the packets. "Wildflowers. Mrs. Chen says they'll fill the yard come spring." Ivy's face lit up like a sunrise. "Really? Oh, Calder, they're perfect." She clutched them to her chest, then looked up at him with sudden seriousness. Did you do the thing you went to do?" "What thing?" "The important thing. I could tell it was important by the way you looked this morning." Calder dismounted and tied Clover to the post. For a moment he considered deflecting, keeping it simple, but Ivy deserved the truth. "I talked to the Reverend," he said, "about making you my ward, legally." Ivy went very still. "You mean, like, really mine? And you really mine?" "Yeah, like that." Her eyes filled with tears. "You want to keep me? For real?" Calder knelt so they were eye to eye. "Ivy, I don't just want to keep you. I need to keep you. You've brought this place back to life. You've brought me back to life. And I know I'm not your pa, and I can't replace the one you lost, but—" "You're not replacing him," Ivy interrupted, her voice fierce. You're being you, and that's enough. That's more than enough." She threw her arms around his neck, and Calder held her close, breathing in the smell of soap and sunshine that clung to her hair. "It'll take time," he warned. "There'll be questions and paperwork and judges. It won't be easy." "I don't care," Ivy said into his shoulder. "As long as I'm here with you, I don't care." And there, in the golden October light, with mountains rising behind them and wildflower seeds clutched in a little girl's hand, a promise was made. Not spoken, but felt. We're family now. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Calder had known since before the fever. Ivy threw herself into preparing for winter with the determination of a seasoned homesteader. She helped Calder chop and stack firewood, learned to preserve vegetables in the root cellar, and even tried her hand at making candles, though the first batch came out lopsided and smelling faintly of burnt hair. "They're perfect," Calder said, examining one. "They're terrible," Ivy corrected, giggling, "but I'll get better. You will." In the evenings, after supper, Calder began teaching Ivy to read. He'd found a handful of old books in a trunk, primers that had belonged to Lily and Rose, and though it hurt to open them at first, seeing Ivy's face light up as she sounded out words made the pain worthwhile. "C-A-T," she read slowly. "Cat! Calder! I did it. You did. Can we do more? Tomorrow. It's late. But she was insatiable. Every night she begged for just one more page, one more word, one more story. And every night, Calder found himself saying yes. On a particularly cold evening in late October, Ivy looked up from her primer and said, "Calder, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What were they like? Your daughters?" Calder's hand stilled on the page. For 5 years, he'd locked their memory away, too painful to touch. But now, with Ivy's curious eyes on him, he found he wanted to talk about them. "Lily was the oldest," he said slowly. 7 when we lost her. She had her mama's laugh and my stubbornness, loved to climb trees and catch frogs, drove Mary crazy with her muddy dresses. Ivy smiled. "She sounds fun." She was, and Rose, she was 4, quieter, always had her nose in a picture book, making up stories about the drawings. She wanted to be a storyteller when she grew up. "I bet she would have been good at it." "Yeah." Calder's voice cracked. "She would have." Ivy reached across the table and took his hand, her small fingers warm against his calloused palm. "I wish I could have met them," she said softly, "but I'm glad you told me about them. It makes them feel less gone, somehow." Calder squeezed her hand, unable to speak. That night, after Ivy had gone to sleep, he pulled out the trunk and looked through the girls' things for the first time in years. Their dresses, their drawings, their little wooden toys, and instead of drowning in grief, he felt something else. Gratitude. For the time he'd had with them, and for the chance to love again. November arrived with the first real snowfall. Calder woke to find Ivy standing at the window, her breath fogging the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "Calder, look, it's everywhere!" "First snow of the season," he said, pulling on his boots. "Means winter's here for real now." Ivy pressed her nose to the glass. "Can I go out in it?" "After breakfast, and you'll need warmer clothes." He frowned, realizing her thin dress wouldn't suffice. "I'll see what I can find." He dug through the trunk again and pulled out one of Lily's old coats, wool, thick, lined with rabbit fur. It would be big on Ivy, but it would keep her warm. When he handed it to her, Ivy's eyes went huge. Was this hers?" "Yeah, Lily's. I think she'd want you to have it." Ivy put it on reverently, running her hands over the soft fur. It hung past her knees, but she didn't seem to care. "Thank you," she whispered. After breakfast, they went outside together. Ivy twirled in the snow, laughing as flakes caught in her hair. She made snow angels, built a lopsided snowman, and threw snowballs at Calder with surprising accuracy. "Where'd you learn to throw like that?" he demanded, dodging. "My pa taught me." She grinned. "He said every kid should know how to defend themselves." Calder scooped up a handful of snow and lobbed it back. It caught her square in the shoulder, and she shrieked with delight. They played until their fingers went numb and their cheeks burned red, and when they finally stumbled back inside, the cabin felt warmer than ever. That night, as they sat by the fire drying off, Ivy said, "This is the best day I've had in a long time." "Me too, kid." "Can we do it again tomorrow?" "If the snow keeps up." "I hope it does." Calder looked at her, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, smile wide, and thought, "So do I." December brought word from Judge Farrow. Reverend Michaels rode out to the cabin personally to deliver the letter, his face grave. "What is it?" Calder asked, his stomach sinking. "The judge wants to meet Ivy, and you. He'll be in Redwood Ridge on December 15th for the hearing." "That's good, isn't it?" "It is, but Calder—" The Reverend hesitated. "There's a complication." "What kind?" "Ivy's aunt and uncle, they've agreed to relinquish their claim, but the judge found a record of another relative, a grandfather, Ivy's mother's father." Calder's blood ran cold. "Where?" "Back east, Philadelphia. A man named Silas Ashford." "Does he know about Ivy?" "The judge wrote to him. We're waiting for a response." Ivy appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What's happening?" Calder looked at her, then back at the Reverend. "What does this mean?" "It means we wait. If the grandfather doesn't respond or doesn't want custody, the hearing proceeds as planned. But if he does..." The Reverend trailed off. Then what? Calder demanded. Then it gets complicated. Ivy crossed the room and took Calder's hand. He won't want me, she said quietly. Nobody wanted me before you. Ivy, it's true. My aunt said my grandfather didn't even come to Mama's funeral. He didn't care then. He won't care now. Calder wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But the fear in his chest wouldn't settle. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Calder tried to act normal, to keep Ivy's spirits up, but the shadow of the unknown grandfather hung over everything. At night, he lay awake imagining worst-case scenarios. A wealthy man from the East demanding custody. A legal battle he couldn't win. Ivy torn from his arms and sent across the country to a stranger. No, he wouldn't let it happen. On December 14th, Calder and Ivy rode into town together. They stayed with Widow Paulson, who fussed over Ivy and fed them a supper neither could eat. You'll be fine, the widow assured them. Judge Farrow's a fair man. He'll see how happy Ivy is with you. I hope you're right, Calder said. That night, Ivy couldn't sleep. Calder found her sitting on the porch of the widow's house, wrapped in Lily's coat, staring at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked, sitting beside her. Too nervous. Me too. She leaned against his shoulder. What if they don't let me stay? Then we'll fight. What if we lose? Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Ivy, look at me. She turned, her face anxious in the moonlight. No matter what happens tomorrow, Calder said, his voice steady and sure, you are my daughter in every way that matters. Papers can't change that. Judges can't change that. Distance can't change that. You understand? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I understand. Good. He pulled her close. Now let's get some sleep. We've got a big day ahead. Shit. The hearing took place in the town hall at 10 o'clock sharp. Judge Farrow was a stern man in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat behind a simple desk, flanked by Reverend Michaels and the town clerk. Calder and Ivy sat on a bench in front, hands clasped tight. Mr. Boone, the judge began, I've read the petition. I've reviewed the testimonies. And I've noted the complication regarding Ivy's grandfather. Has there been any response? Not yet, Your Honor, Reverend Michaels said. The judge nodded. Then we'll proceed. Mr. Boone, tell me in your own words why you're seeking guardianship. Calder stood, his heart hammering. Because Ivy needs a home, and I can give her one. She's smart, she's strong, and she deserves a chance to grow up safe and loved. I can provide that. You live alone, 12 miles from town. You're a widower with no other family. What makes you qualified to raise a child? I've raised children before, Your Honor. 2 daughters. I know what it takes. And you lost them. The words were a knife to the gut. Yes, sir, I did, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to love, or protect, or teach. Judge Farrow turned to Ivy. Young lady, do you want to stay with Mr. Boone? Ivy stood, her voice clear. Yes, sir. More than anything. Why? Because he's kind, and he doesn't treat me like a burden. He teaches me things, and listens to me, and makes me feel like I matter, and her voice wavered. And he's the only person who's ever made me feel like I have a home. The room was silent. Judge Farrow made a note. I'll take this under advisement. We'll reconvene in... The door burst open. A man in a fine suit strode in, followed by a younger man carrying a leather case. Your Honor, the first man said, his voice clipped and authoritative, I represent Silas Ashford of Philadelphia. He's claiming custody of his granddaughter, Ivy Hale. And just like that, the world fell apart. Calder felt Ivy's hand go rigid in his. The lawyer was tall and impeccably dressed, his suit worth more than everything Calder owned combined. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Behind him, his assistant set a leather briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Judge Farrow's expression hardened. Mr. Whitmore, I presume? Indeed, Your Honor, Leonard Whitmore, representing Mr. Silas Ashford. He pulled a thick envelope from his coat. I have here documentation establishing my client's legal claim to the minor child, Ivy Hale, including birth certificates, marriage licenses proving direct lineage, and a notarized statement of intent to assume full custody. Calder's throat closed. Beside him, Ivy had gone completely still, her face drained of color. Your Honor, Reverend Michaels stood quickly. This is highly irregular. We received no notice that Mr. Ashford would be contesting. My client only became aware of his granddaughter's existence 10 days ago, Whitmore interrupted smoothly. Upon receiving Judge Farrow's letter, he immediately initiated legal proceedings. Time was of the essence. Where's Mr. Ashford? The judge asked. Why isn't he here himself? My client is 73 years old and in declining health. Travel from Philadelphia to the Montana Territory would be inadvisable given his condition. However, he has authorized me to act with full power of attorney in this matter. Judge Farrow's jaw tightened. Let me see the documents. Whitmore handed them over with a flourish. The judge read in silence, his face growing graver with each page. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Boone, did you know Ivy had a living grandfather? Calder found his voice. No, sir. She never mentioned him. Because I didn't know him, Ivy burst out, her voice shaking. Mama never talked about him. Never. Not once. Whitmore turned to her with a condescending smile that made Calder's fists clench. That's because your mother was estranged from her father, child. A tragic misunderstanding that Mr. Ashford deeply regrets. He spent years trying to locate her, and now that he's learned of your existence, he wishes to rectify his mistakes by providing you with the life you deserve. I have the life I deserve, Ivy said fiercely. Right here. In a cabin in the wilderness with an unmarried man twice your age? Whitmore's eyebrows rose. Hardly appropriate, wouldn't you say, Your Honor? Watch your tongue, Calder growled, half rising from his seat. Mr. Boone, sit down, Judge Farrow ordered. To Whitmore. This is a guardianship hearing, counselor, not a custody battle. I'll review your client's claim, but I won't be bullied into an immediate decision. Of course, Your Honor. However, I must point out that blood relation takes precedence in territorial law. Mr. Ashford is the child's closest living relative. The law is quite clear on this matter. The law also considers the best interests of the child. And what could be more in her interest than being raised by family? Mr. Ashford is a man of considerable means. He can provide Ivy with education, opportunity, societal standing, everything a young girl needs to thrive. Can Mr. Boone offer the same? The question hung in the air like a noose. Calder wanted to scream that he could offer something money couldn't buy, love, safety, belonging. But the lawyer's words had hit their mark. What could a mountain man with a small cabin and modest savings offer compared to a wealthy grandfather from Philadelphia? Judge Farrow set the documents down. I'm calling a recess. We'll reconvene in 2 hours. Mr. Whitmore, I want a detailed accounting of Mr. Ashford's intentions, where Ivy would live, who would care for her day-to-day. What arrangements would be made for her education? Mr. Boone, I suggest you consult with Reverend Michaels. This situation has become significantly more complex. The gavel struck. Ivy immediately turned to Calder, tears streaming down her face. He can't take me. Calder, he can't. Shh. Calder pulled her close, his own heart shattering. We're not done fighting yet. But even as he said it, he could feel her slipping away. They gathered in the small room behind the town hall. Calder, Ivy, Reverend Michaels, Tom Bridger, and Widow Paulson, who'd insisted on coming. This is a disaster, the Reverend said, pacing. Blood relation carries enormous weight in these cases. If Ashford's claim is legitimate, it doesn't matter if it's legitimate, Calder interrupted. He abandoned his daughter. Ivy's mother wanted nothing to do with him. That has to count for something. It does, but it's circumstantial. We'd need proof of abuse or neglect on Ashford's part, and we don't have that. What we have is a wealthy man claiming his only living blood relative. The Reverend's face was anguished. I'm sorry, Calder. I wish I had better news. So that's it? We just give up? No, Tom Bridger said firmly. We fight. We show the judge that Ivy's better off here. We get testimonies from everyone in town about how well she's doing with you. We make the case that tearing her away would do more harm than good. Will it be enough? Calder asked. No one answered. Ivy sat in the corner, silent and small, Lily's coat wrapped tight around her. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the courtroom. Calder crossed to her and knelt. Hey, look at me. Slowly she raised her eyes. I'm not giving up on you, he said. Whatever happens in there, whatever that lawyer says, I'm not giving up. You hear me? What if the judge says I have to go? Then we'll appeal. We'll fight it in every court in the territory if we have to. And if we lose? Calder's throat tightened. Then I'll come get you. I don't care how far away you are. I'll find a way. Ivy threw her arms around his neck, sobbing. I don't want to leave. I don't want to go with some stranger who didn't even care enough to find Mama when she was alive. I know, sweetheart. I know. Widow Paulson cleared her throat. Calder, there's something you should know. I knew Ivy's mother, Clara. She came through town once, years ago, pregnant and running. She stayed with me for a week before heading west. Calder looked up. What was she running from? Her father. She said he was a controlling man, obsessed with appearances and legacy. When she fell in love with a minor, Ivy's father, Silas disowned her, told her she was dead to him. Clara was heartbroken, but she chose love over money. The widow's eyes were fierce. That man didn't want his daughter when she was alive. He only wants Ivy now because she's all that's left of his bloodline. Don't you dare let him take her. I won't, Calder vowed. But the words felt hollow, besumped. When the hearing reconvened, Whitmore had prepared a devastating case. He presented documents showing Silas Ashford's wealth, investments, properties, business holdings that stretched across 3 states. He described the Philadelphia estate where Ivy would live, complete with private tutors, music lessons, and access to the finest society the East Coast had to offer. Mr. Ashford's health is failing, Whitmore said gravely. He's a lonely old man who made terrible mistakes with his daughter and now seeks redemption through his granddaughter. He wants to give Ivy everything he denied her mother: security, education, a future. Can Mr. Boone offer the same? Judge Farrow turned to Calder. Can you? Calder stood slowly. No, Your Honor. I can't offer fancy estates or private tutors. What I can offer is a home where she's loved for who she is, not what she represents. A place where she's not a replacement for someone lost or a piece of a legacy. She's just Ivy, and that's enough. Is it? Whitmore challenged. Your Honor, Mr. Boone is a widower living in isolation. He has no experience raising a daughter of Ivy's age. His own children died when they were very young. He has limited means, limited education, and limited prospects. How can he possibly prepare Ivy for the modern world? By teaching her what matters, Calder shot back. Kindness, resilience, how to stand on her own feet, how to love without fear. His voice rose. That man doesn't know Ivy. He doesn't know she plants flowers because it makes her feel rooted. He doesn't know she hums while she works or that she's teaching herself to read. He doesn't know anything about her except that she shares his blood. And that's not enough. It shouldn't be enough. But legally, it is, Whitmore said quietly. Judge Farrow raised a hand. Mr. Whitmore, your arguments are noted. However, I'd like to hear from Ivy herself. Young lady, please stand. Ivy rose, trembling but defiant. I'm going to ask you some questions, the judge said gently, and I want you to answer honestly. No one here will be angry with you, no matter what you say. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Do you remember your grandfather? Ever meeting him or hearing your mother speak of him? No, sir. Mama never mentioned him, not once. If you were given a choice between living with Mr. Boone in Montana or living with your grandfather in Philadelphia, which would you choose? Ivy didn't hesitate. Mr. Boone, even knowing your grandfather could provide you with more material comfort, I don't care about comfort. I care about being wanted. Her voice strengthened. Calder chose me. When nobody else did, when I was dirty and starving and had nothing to offer, he chose me. He didn't have to. He could have sent me back to town or turned me away, but he didn't. He gave me food and a bed and a home. He taught me things. He listens when I talk. He makes me feel like I matter. The tears spilled down her cheeks. My grandfather is a stranger. Maybe he's sorry now. Maybe he really does want to make things right. But he didn't want Mama. He threw her away when she needed him, and now he wants me because what? Because I'm all that's left? Because he's lonely? That's not love. That's guilt. The courtroom was dead silent. Calder loves me, Ivy continued, her voice breaking. I know he does. Not because I'm related to him or because I'm useful or because I fixed something broken in his life. He loves me because I'm me, and that's the only kind of love that matters. Judge Farrow's expression was unreadable. Thank you, Ivy. You may sit. Ivy collapsed back onto the bench, and Calder immediately took her hand. The judge shuffled through papers, his face grave. Finally, he looked up. This is one of the more difficult cases I've presided over. On one hand, we have blood relation and considerable resources. On the other, we have genuine affection and demonstrated care. The law favors blood, but my conscience favors the child's well-being. He paused. However, I cannot in good conscience deny a dying man the chance to know his only grandchild, nor can I ignore the significant advantages Mr. Ashford can provide. Therefore, I'm issuing a temporary ruling. Calder's stomach dropped. Custody will be granted to Silas Ashford for a probationary period of 6 months. During that time, Ivy will reside in Philadelphia under her grandfather's care. Mr. Boone will be permitted to write letters but not visit. At the end of 6 months, I will review the arrangement. If Mr. Ashford has proven himself a suitable guardian and Ivy has adapted well, custody will become permanent. If not, we'll revisit Mr. Boone's petition. No! Ivy screamed. No, you can't! Your Honor, please! My decision is final. I'm sorry, Ivy, truly, but this is what the law requires. The law is wrong, Calder pulled her close as she dissolved into sobs. Across the room, Whitmore was already packing his briefcase, looking satisfied. When does she leave? Calder managed to ask. Mr. Whitmore has arranged for departure in 3 days. There's a train from Billings to Chicago, then on to Philadelphia. Ivy will be accompanied by a chaperone. 3 days, Calder repeated numbly. I'll give you time to say your goodbyes. Judge Farrow's voice was heavy. For what it's worth, Mr. Boone, I hope you're right about love being what matters, but I have to follow the law. The gavel struck again, and Calder's world shattered. What? They rode back to the cabin in silence. Ivy sat in front of Calder on Clover's back, rigid and unseeing. She hadn't stopped crying since the ruling, and now the tears just flowed silently down her face, soaking into Lily's coat. When they reached the cabin, she slid down and walked inside without a word. Calder followed, his chest hollow. Ivy stood in the middle of the room, looking around as if memorizing every detail. The fireplace where she'd slept that first night, the table where they'd shared so many meals, the shelf where her primer sat, the peg by the door where she hung her coat. 3 days, she whispered. 3 days, Calder confirmed. She turned to him, her face devastated. What do we do? Calder had no answer. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do. So he did the only thing he could. He opened his arms. Ivy ran to him, and they held each other while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and the world they'd built together began to crumble. The first day they tried to act normal. Calder made breakfast. Ivy fed the chickens. They worked in the garden, preparing the beds for spring, even though Ivy wouldn't be there to see them bloom. Every action felt surreal, like moving through a dream. That afternoon, Ivy planted the wildflower seeds Mrs. Chen had given them. They'll be here when I come back, she said fiercely, pressing each seed into the frozen earth. They'll remind me of home. You are coming back, Calder said, needing to believe it. Promise? I promise. 6 months, Ivy. That's all. Then we'll fight again, and this time we'll win. But the words tasted like ash. That night, Ivy couldn't sleep. Calder found her sitting at the table, staring at her primer. Can you teach me more? She asked. I want to learn as much as I can before I go, so I can keep learning there. Stay connected to you. So Calder sat with her until dawn, teaching her words and sounds and stories, both of them clinging to normalcy even as time slipped away. The second day was harder. Widow Paulson and Tom Bridger rode out with supplies and support. The widow had sewn Ivy a new dress, simple but sturdy, and Tom brought a small leather journal. For writing letters, he said gruffly. You write to Calder, and he'll write back. Distance doesn't mean gone. Ivy hugged them both, tears streaming. After they left, Calder helped Ivy pack. She didn't have much, a few pieces of clothing, the primer, the journal, a wooden spoon she'd carved herself. She folded everything carefully, then stopped. "Can I take Lily's coat?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course." "And could I have something of yours? So I don't forget?" Calder thought for a moment, then went to his chest and pulled out a small carved wooden horse, something he'd made for Rose years ago. He'd never been able to look at it without pain, but now he pressed it into Ivy's hands. "My daughter loved this," he said quietly. "Now it's yours." Ivy clutched it to her chest, crying too hard to speak. That night they sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars wheel overhead. "Tell me about them again," Ivy said. "Lily and Rose." So Calder talked. About Lily's wild spirit and Rose's gentle heart. About Mary's laughter and the life they'd built before the fever. About loss and grief and the long, cold years after. "And then you found me," Ivy said. "You found me," Calder corrected. "You walked out of the grass and asked for scraps, and you saved my life without even knowing it." "I love you, Calder." It was the first time she'd said it out loud. "I love you too, Ivy. More than I thought I could love anything again." They sat in silence, holding on to each other and the moment, knowing it was slipping away. The third day arrived too fast. They woke before dawn. Calder made coffee neither of them drank. Ivy put on the new dress and Lily's coat and stood by the door, her small bag packed. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I know." "Can't we run? Just disappear into the mountains?" "They'd find us, and it would make things worse." "I don't care." "I do." Calder knelt in front of her. "Ivy, listen to me. You're strong. Stronger than you know. You're going to go to Philadelphia, and you're going to be brave, and you're going to show that old man exactly what kind of person you are. And in 6 months, when the judge asks if you're happy, you tell him the truth. You tell him where you belong. With you. With me." Ivy threw her arms around him one more time, and they stood there in the cold morning light, two people who'd found each other against all odds, now being torn apart by law and blood and money. Finally, Calder pulled back. "We have to go. The train won't wait." The ride to Billings took all day. They barely spoke, both too raw for words. When they finally reached the station, Whitmore's chaperone was waiting, a stern-faced woman in black who looked at Ivy with cool efficiency. "Miss Hale, I'm Mrs. Gerard. I'll be accompanying you to Philadelphia." Ivy ignored her, turning to Calder instead. "Write to me," she begged. "Every week. Promise." "Every week," Calder vowed. "And you write back." "I will." The train whistle blew. "It's time," Mrs. Gerard said. Ivy's face crumpled, and she grabbed Calder's hand. "Don't let go." "I have to, sweetheart. I can't do this." "Yes, you can." "Miss Hale, we must board now." Calder gently pried Ivy's fingers loose and handed her bag to Mrs. Gerard. Then he pulled Ivy close one last time, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. 6 months, he whispered, "and then you're coming home." Ivy nodded against his chest, unable to speak. Mrs. Gerard took her hand and led her toward the train. At the steps, Ivy turned back, her face streaked with tears. "I'll wait for you," she called, "however long it takes." "I'll come for you," Calder shouted back. "I promise." And then she was gone, disappearing into the train car. Calder stood on the platform as the train pulled away, watching until it was nothing but smoke on the horizon. Around him, people moved and talked and lived their lives, but he felt frozen, shattered, hollowed out. He'd lost his family once before to fever. Now he'd lost his daughter to the law. And for the first time since Mary died, Calder Boone dropped to his knees and wept. The cabin felt like a tomb again. Calder stood in the doorway that first night back, unable to cross the threshold. Inside waited all the evidence of Ivy's presence, her palette by the fire, her wooden spoon on the table, her primer on the shelf, the half-finished candles she'd been so proud of despite their crooked wicks. Every object was a knife to the heart. He slept on the porch that night, wrapped in his coat, unable to bear the emptiness inside. By morning, frost had settled over everything, turning the world white and silent. Calder forced himself to move. He fed the chickens, though Ivy had always loved that chore. He stoked the fire, though her laughter no longer filled the room. He made coffee, but couldn't drink it. Everything he did felt mechanical, meaningless. On the table sat the letter he'd started writing the moment he'd returned. Dear Ivy, I hope this finds you safe. I hope the journey wasn't too hard. I hope... He'd crossed it out and started again. Dear Ivy, the cabin is quiet without you. Too quiet. The chickens miss you. Clover keeps looking for you in the yard. I miss you most of all. Too desperate. He'd crumpled that one too. Finally, on the third attempt, he'd managed something he could send. Dear Ivy, I'm writing this the day you left, though I know it'll take time to reach you. I want you to know I meant every word I said on that platform. 6 months. That's all we have to wait. Keep your head up and remember who you are. Remember where you belong. The wildflower seeds are in the ground, waiting for spring, just like I'm waiting for you. Write soon. Tell me everything. Yours always, Calder. He'd taken it to town the next day, paying extra for fast delivery, then rode back to the cabin and waited. Days became weeks, and the waiting nearly killed him. Reverend Michaels visited often during those early weeks, bringing supplies and company Calder didn't want but couldn't refuse. Any word? The Reverend would ask gently. Not yet. Mail takes time. It does. The Reverend would pause, then add, How are you holding up? I'm fine. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Tom Bridger was more direct. He showed up one morning with a bottle of whiskey and sat on the porch without invitation. You look like hell, Boone. Thanks. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't hardtack and coffee? Calder didn't answer. Tom opened the bottle and took a swig, then passed it over. Drink. I don't need... Drink, or I'll pour it down your throat myself. Calder took the bottle and drank. The whiskey burned, but it was something to feel besides grief. You can't do this, Tom said after a while. You can't crawl into a hole and die just because she's gone. That girl's coming back, and when she does, she needs you alive and whole. I am alive. Barely. Tom's voice softened. I know what loss looks like, Calder. I've worn it myself. But this isn't loss. Not yet. She's still breathing. You're still breathing, and there's still a chance. The law's against us. The law changes. People change. Hell, that old man in Philadelphia might keel over tomorrow and solve everything. Tom took the bottle back. Point is, you can't give up. Not on her, not on yourself. Calder stared at the mountains, their peaks white with early snow. What if 6 months pass and the judge says she has to stay? Then you fight harder. You get a better lawyer. You appeal to higher courts. You do whatever it takes. And if none of it works? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Then you get on a train to Philadelphia and you bring her home yourself. Law be damned. Calder looked at him sharply. That's kidnapping. That's love. Tom stood, brushing off his pants. Think about it. Meanwhile, eat something real and stop punishing yourself. Ivy wouldn't want that. He left the whiskey and rode away. Calder sat alone on the porch until sunset, Tom's words echoing in his head. You bring her home yourself. Could he? Should he? He didn't know, but the thought took root. 3 weeks after Ivy left, the first letter arrived. Calder had ridden into town for supplies when Mrs. Chen flagged him down. Mr. Boone, mail for you, from Philadelphia. His heart nearly stopped. He took the envelope with shaking hands, Ivy's careful handwriting stark across the front. He didn't open it there, couldn't bear the thought of reading her words with curious eyes watching. He shoved it in his coat, finished his business in record time, and rode back to the cabin at a gallop. Once inside, he sat at the table and carefully broke the seal. Dear Calder, we arrived in Philadelphia 4 days ago. The train ride was very long, and Mrs. Gerard didn't talk much, which was fine, because I didn't feel like talking either. I kept thinking about home the whole time. Philadelphia is huge, bigger than anything I ever imagined. There are buildings taller than trees and so many people everywhere. The noise never stops. Even at night, I can hear carriages and voices, and I can't see the stars because of all the lights. My grandfather's house is very big. It has marble floors and chandeliers and more rooms than I can count. There are servants everywhere, a cook, a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, maids. They're all very polite, but they look at me like I'm a curiosity. I guess I am. I don't fit here. Grandfather Silas is old and sick, like the lawyer said. He stays in bed most days. When I first met him, he cried, which scared me. He kept saying I look like my mother. He asked me to call him grandfather, but it feels wrong. He's a stranger. He wants me to have tutors and learn piano and wear fancy dresses. The dresses are pretty, but they're uncomfortable. I miss my old clothes. I miss Lily's coat, but they took it away and gave me a new one made of velvet. It's warm, but it doesn't smell like home. I have my own room. It's bigger than our whole cabin, but it's lonely. There's a big bed and a desk and shelves full of books I don't know how to read yet. I sleep with the wooden horse you gave me. It helps me remember you're real, and this isn't forever. Please write back soon. I miss you so much it hurts. I miss the cabin and Clover and the chickens and the quiet. I miss making breakfast with you and sitting on the porch and planting seeds. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. I'm counting the days until 6 months is up. Only 158 days left. I love you, Pa. I know I never called you that before, but it feels right now. You're my Pa even if the law doesn't say so. Love, Ivy. Calder read it 3 times, his throat tight. She was safe, lonely and miserable, but safe. And she'd called him Pa. He pulled out paper and pen and started writing immediately. Dear Ivy, your letter arrived today and I can't tell you what it meant to read your words. I've been so worried. I'm sorry Philadelphia doesn't feel like home. I wish I could fix that. But remember, you don't have to fit their mold. You're perfect exactly as you are. Don't let anyone make you feel small or wrong. The cabin's quiet without you. I still set 2 plates at breakfast sometimes before I remember. The chickens are doing fine. Clover misses you. She keeps nosing around looking for you. And the wildflower seeds are sleeping under the snow, waiting for spring. Just like I'm waiting for you. You can call me Pa if you want. It would be an honor. You're my daughter in every way that matters, and no judge or lawyer or law can change that. Stay strong, sweetheart. 158 days will pass faster than you think, and then you're coming home. All my love, Pa. He mailed it the next morning and returned to counting days. The letters became their lifeline. Every week, sometimes twice a week, envelopes traveled between Montana and Philadelphia. Ivy's letters painted a picture of a gilded cage, beautiful but suffocating. She wrote about tutors who spoke Latin and French, about piano lessons that made her fingers ache, about dinners where she had to use 4 different forks and wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. She wrote about her grandfather, too. Silas Ashford was a complicated man, sometimes kind, sometimes distant, always watching her with desperate, hungry eyes. He talks about my mother constantly, Ivy wrote in her 5th letter. He keeps saying he wants to give me everything he should have given her. But when I ask why he turned her away, he just gets quiet and sad. I think he knows he made a terrible mistake, and now he's trying to fix it through me. But I'm not my mother. I'm just me. And I don't think that's enough for him. Calder's responses were steady, encouraging, full of life from the cabin. He told her about the first snow, about the deer he'd seen at the creek, about Tom Bridger's visit and Widow Paulson's questions. He reminded her constantly that she was loved, that she belonged in Montana, that this was temporary. But as weeks became months, a new tone crept into Ivy's letters. Grandfather is getting sicker, she wrote in late February. The doctor comes every day now. Grandfather talks about legacy a lot, about the Ashford name and what it means. He wants me to understand that I'm part of something bigger than myself, that I have responsibilities. I don't know what to say to that. I don't feel like an Ashford. I feel like a Hale, or a Boone, if you'd have me. But he's dying, Pa, and I think he's scared. And even though he's a stranger, I feel sorry for him. Is that wrong? Calder's chest tightened reading those words. Ivy's compassionate heart was both her greatest strength and his deepest fear. What if her sympathy for a dying old man made her stay? He wrote back carefully. It's not wrong to feel compassion. That's what makes you special, Ivy. But remember, sympathy doesn't mean obligation. You can feel sorry for him and still choose your own path. Your life belongs to you, not to a name or a legacy. By March, 3 months had passed. Halfway through the sentence, Ivy's letters had grown shorter, more strained. She was tired, she said. The tutors were relentless. The piano teacher was cruel. The servants whispered about her behind closed doors. She felt like a doll being dressed up and positioned just so, with no say in her own life. I want to come home, she wrote. I want it so badly, I dream about it every night. I dream about the cabin and the chickens and sitting on the porch with you. I dream about planting seeds and making candles and reading primers by firelight. Is it really only 79 days left? It feels like forever. Calder read that letter on a cold March evening and made a decision. He would go to Philadelphia, not to take her, not yet, but to see her, to remind her she wasn't alone, to show the judge, when the time came, that he hadn't given up. He told Reverend Michaels his plan the next day. Are you sure that's wise? The Reverend asked. The judge said no visits. He said no visits in the custody arrangement, but I'm not visiting as a guardian. I'm visiting as a friend, a concerned citizen checking on a child's welfare. Whitmore will make trouble. Let him. Calder's voice was steel. I need to see her. Need to look her in the eye and know she's all right. Letters aren't enough anymore. The Reverend studied him, then nodded slowly. When will you leave? Tomorrow. I'll be gone a week, maybe 2, depending on trains. Can you look after the place? Of course. And Calder? The Reverend's expression was grave. Be careful. You're walking into a lion's den. I've faced worse. The journey east was grueling. Calder had never been on a train before the trip to Billings with Ivy, and now he was traveling across half the country. The noise, the crowds, the endless rocking motion, all of it grated on him, but he kept Ivy's letters in his pocket and read them when the confinement became too much. 4 days later, he arrived in Philadelphia. The city was overwhelming. Buildings rose like mountains, streets teemed with carriages and people, and the air smelled of coal smoke and industry. Calder felt completely out of place in his worn coat and work boots, but he pushed through the crowds with determination. He found the Ashford estate easily. It was exactly as Ivy had described. A massive stone mansion behind iron gates, with manicured lawns and a circular drive. Guards stood at the entrance. Calder approached cautiously. I'm here to see Ivy Hale, he told the guard. Do you have an appointment? No, but I've come a long way. Just tell her Calder Boone is here. The guard looked skeptical, but disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, he returned with a thin, severe-looking woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper. Mr. Boone, this is highly irregular. Miss Hale is currently with her tutor. I'll wait. I'm afraid that's not possible. Mr. Ashford's instructions are quite clear. No unauthorized visitors. I'm not unauthorized. I'm her guardian, or I was. And I'm here to see her, with or without permission. Mrs. Pemberton's mouth thinned. I'll inform Mr. Ashford of your presence. Please wait here. She left him standing at the gates like a beggar. 20 minutes passed. 30. Calder was about to force his way through when he saw movement behind one of the upper windows, a small face pressed against the glass. Ivy. Even from this distance, he could see her eyes go wide. Her mouth formed his name. Then she was gone. Moments later, the front door burst open and Ivy came running, actually running, down the steps, a maid chasing after her, calling for her to stop, to be dignified, to remember herself. Ivy ignored all of it. She hit the gates at full speed, her hands grabbing the iron bars. Calder, Pa, you came. You're really here. I'm here, sweetheart. He gripped the bars from his side, their fingers intertwining through the gaps. God, look at you. She was wearing a blue velvet dress with lace collar, her hair pinned up in an elaborate style. She looked like a different person, polished, refined, utterly miserable. I can't believe you came, she sobbed. I thought I'd dreamed you, thought maybe I'd made you up. I'm real, and so are you. Don't forget that. The maid caught up, breathless. Miss Hale, you mustn't. Mr. Ashford will be. I don't care. Ivy's voice was fierce. This is my pa. Open the gates. I can't do that without authorization. Then get authorization. Calder kept his eyes on Ivy. How are you, really? Awful, Lonely. I hate it here, Pa. The dresses and the lessons and the rules about everything. They won't let me go outside alone, won't let me get dirty, won't let me be myself. Tears streamed down her face. I want to come home. Soon. The 6 months are almost up. Just hold on a little longer. What if the judge says I have to stay? Then we'll fight. Mr. Boone. The voice was weak but commanding. Calder turned to see an elderly man being wheeled down the path by a servant. Silas Ashford was gaunt, his face pale and lined with pain, but his eyes were sharp. So you're the mountain man who's been filling my granddaughter's head with false hope. Calder straightened. I'm the man who gave her a home when no one else would. And I'm the man whose blood she shares. The man who can give her a future you never could. Silas's gaze was cold. You shouldn't have come. You're violating the terms of the custody arrangement. I came to see my daughter. She's not your daughter. She's mine. By law and by blood. By blood, maybe. But you don't know her. You don't know what makes her laugh or what scares her or what she dreams about. You're trying to turn her into something she's not because you couldn't control her mother. Silas's face went white. How dare you? It's true, isn't it? Calder's voice was steady. You disowned Clara for choosing love over money, and now you want Ivy to be the daughter you lost. But she's not Clara, she's Ivy, and she deserves better than being someone's second chance. I can give her everything, except what she needs most. Freedom. Love without conditions. A place where she's valued for who she is. Calder looked at Ivy through the bars. That's what home means. And this isn't it. Silas's hands trembled on the arms of his wheelchair. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. But it vanished quickly. Guards, he said quietly. Escort Mr. Boone from the property. And Ivy, return to your lessons immediately. No! Ivy clutched the bars harder. Grandfather, please. Now, Ivy. 2 guards appeared, taking Calder firmly by the arms. Wait! Ivy screamed. Pa, don't go! Calder didn't fight the guards, but he kept his eyes locked on Ivy. Remember what I told you. Remember who you are. And remember I'm fighting for you. Always. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. They pulled him away from the gates, and the last thing he saw was Ivy crumpling to her knees, the maid trying to comfort her while Silas watched with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been something darker. But Calder spent 2 more days in Philadelphia trying to see Ivy again, but the estate was locked down tight. Guards had orders to turn him away on sight. He considered sneaking in, but knew it would only hurt their case when the custody hearing resumed. Finally, defeated, he started the long journey home. On the train, he wrote Ivy another letter. Dear Ivy, I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry I couldn't take you with me. But seeing you, even for those few minutes, reminded me why I'm fighting. You're worth every mile, every argument, every sleepless night. Stay strong. The end is coming, and when it does, we'll be ready. All my love, Pa. He mailed it from the next station and tried not to think about the look in Silas Ashford's eyes. The old man was dying. That much was clear. And Calder couldn't shake the feeling that Silas had a plan, one that didn't involve giving Ivy up without a fight. The question was, what would he do when he ran out of time? The answer came 3 weeks later, just as spring began to break across Montana. Calder was repairing the chicken coop when he heard hoofbeats. He looked up to see Reverend Michaels riding hard, his face urgent. Calder! The Reverend dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. Telegram from Philadelphia. It's about Silas Ashford. Calder's stomach dropped. What happened? The Reverend handed over the thin paper, his expression grim. Calder read it once, then again, his hands shaking. Silas Ashford deceased. Stop heart failure. Stop will reading scheduled. Stop your presence requested. Stop. He's dead, Calder said numbly. Yes. And according to the lawyer who sent this, there's something in the will about Ivy. Calder looked up, hope and fear warring in his chest. What does that mean? It means, the Reverend said carefully, that everything might be about to change. Calder was on a train heading east again within 24 hours. This time the journey felt different. Not hopeful exactly, but charged with possibility. Silas Ashford's death changed everything. Without the grandfather's claim, Ivy's custody would revert to the courts. Judge Farrow would have to reconsider. The 6-month probation was meaningless now, unless the will said otherwise. That thought kept Calder awake through 2 nights of travel. What if Silas had left provisions? What if he'd appointed another guardian, some distant relative or trusted associate? What if his final act was to ensure Ivy stayed in Philadelphia permanently, bound by money and legal maneuvers Calder couldn't fight? He tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the rhythm of the rails, the passing landscape, anything but the growing knot of anxiety in his chest. When he finally arrived in Philadelphia, the city felt even more oppressive than before. Rain fell in gray sheets, turning the streets to mud and the sky to slate. Calder hired a cab to take him to the address on the telegram, a law office in the heart of the financial district. The building was all dark wood and brass fixtures, intimidating in its polished wealth. A secretary directed him to the 3rd floor, where he found himself in a waiting room with leather chairs and oil paintings of stern-faced men in judicial robes. He wasn't alone. Ivy sat in one of the chairs, wearing black mourning clothes that made her look even smaller. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, sat beside her with rigid posture. When Ivy saw Calder, her face transformed. "Pa!" She leaped up and ran to him. Calder caught her, holding tight. She'd lost weight. Her face was thinner, her eyes shadowed, but she was here, alive, and in his arms again. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you." "He died 3 days ago," Ivy said, her voice muffled against his coat. "Just went to sleep and didn't wake up. The doctor said his heart gave out." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "I'm not." She pulled back, her expression fierce. "Is that terrible? I'm not glad he died, but I'm not sorry either. He was never cruel, but he was never you." Mrs. Pemberton cleared her throat disapprovingly. "Miss Hale, that's hardly appropriate." "I don't care about appropriate," Ivy shot back. Then, quieter to Calder, "What happens now?" "I don't know yet, but we're about to find out." The door to the inner office opened, and a man in his 50s stepped out, tall, distinguished, with silver threading through dark hair. He wore spectacles and carried an air of authority that matched the surroundings. "Mr. Boone, I'm Charles Dennison, Mr. Ashford's attorney. Thank you for coming on such short notice. If you'll all come in, we can proceed with the reading." They filed into a spacious office dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Dennison gestured to chairs arranged in front of the desk. Calder and Ivy sat together, their hands linked. Mrs. Pemberton took a seat at the side, her face impassive. Dennison settled behind the desk and opened a leather portfolio. "This is the last will and testament of Silas Ashford, executed 2 weeks before his death. I'll skip the legal formalities and focus on the portions relevant to those present." He adjusted his spectacles and began reading. "To my faithful staff, I leave monetary gifts in recognition of their years of service. Specific amounts are detailed in Appendix A. To various charitable organizations, I bequeath portions of my estate as outlined in Appendix B." He looked up. "The bulk of Mr. Ashford's fortune, including properties, investments, and business holdings, has been placed in trust. The details are complex, but what matters for our purposes today is the provision regarding his granddaughter, Ivy Hale." Calder's grip on Ivy's hand tightened. Dennison continued, "I'll read this section in full, as Mr. Ashford specifically requested." He cleared his throat and read, "Regarding my granddaughter, Ivy Hale, I must begin with a confession. I claimed custody of this child not primarily out of love, though I have come to love her in the brief time we've shared, but out of pride, guilt, and a desperate desire to control what remained of my bloodline. My daughter Clara was the light of my life, and I destroyed our relationship through my own arrogance and obsession with legacy. When she chose love over wealth, I disowned her. When she needed me, I turned away. And when she died, I was too proud to acknowledge my mistake or to seek out the child she'd left behind." Ivy's breath caught. Calder squeezed her hand as Dennison kept reading. "It was only when the courts informed me of Ivy's existence that I saw a chance, not for redemption, which I don't deserve, but for correction. I told myself I wanted to give her the opportunities I'd denied her mother. In truth, I wanted to erase my failures by molding Ivy into the daughter I'd lost. I wanted to possess her as I'd tried to possess Clara. I wanted to win, even from the grave. The room was utterly silent. But in these past months, I've watched Ivy closely. I've seen her strength, her kindness, her resilience. I've also seen her unhappiness. No matter what material comforts I've provided, no matter what tutors or opportunities or wealth I've offered, she remains a wilted flower in gilded soil. She speaks constantly of a cabin in Montana, of chickens and mountains, and a man she calls Pa. She keeps a wooden horse under her pillow and plants imaginary gardens on paper because she misses the real ones she left behind. Tears were streaming down Ivy's face now. Calder's own eyes burned. I visited her room one night when she thought I was asleep. I found her writing a letter, her 47th, I later learned, to Calder Boone. In it, she wrote, "I know grandfather is trying, but he wants me to be someone I'm not. You love me for who I am. That's the only kind of love that matters." Those words broke something in me that I thought had died years ago. Dennison paused, his own voice thick with emotion, then continued. I realized then that I was repeating my greatest mistake. I was trying to force Ivy into a life she didn't choose, just as I'd tried to force Clara. And I was doing it not for her benefit, but for mine, for my legacy, for my pride. I was being the same controlling, arrogant man who'd driven away everyone he claimed to love. He took a breath. And so, I make this final request, knowing it may be the only decent thing I've done in years. I hereby relinquish all claims to Ivy Hale. I withdraw my petition for custody. I acknowledge that Calder Boone has shown her more genuine love in 4 months than I managed in a lifetime with my own daughter. If the courts will allow it, I ask that full guardianship be granted to Mr. Boone immediately. Ivy made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Furthermore, Dennison read, I leave to Ivy Hale a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 to be accessed when she reaches her majority or with Mr. Boone's approval for educational or emergency purposes. This is not an attempt to buy her affection or to control her future. It is simply what her mother should have inherited had I not been too stubborn to make amends while she lived. The attorney set down the document and removed his spectacles. There's more legal language, but that's the essence. Mr. Ashford spent his final days putting his affairs in order. He also wrote a letter to Judge Farrow, formally withdrawing his custody claim and recommending immediate guardianship be granted to you, Mr. Boone. I've already sent copies to the Montana Territory courts. Calder couldn't speak. The enormity of it, the confession, the reversal, the sheer unexpected grace of it left him speechless. Ivy turned to him, her face radiant through tears. Does this mean... It means you're coming home, Calder managed, his voice breaking. It means we won. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing with relief and joy and the release of months of tension. Calder held her close, his own tears falling freely now, not caring who saw. Mrs. Pemberton dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Dennison looked moved. After a moment, the attorney spoke again. There are papers to sign, of course, and you'll need to appear before Judge Farrow to finalize everything, but Mr. Ashford's wishes were quite clear, and with his claim withdrawn, there's no legal barrier to your guardianship. How soon can we leave? Calder asked. The estate needs a few days to settle some matters. There are personal effects Mr. Ashford wanted Ivy to have, letters from her mother, a few family heirlooms, and frankly, after months here, I imagine Ivy would like to say proper goodbyes. Calder looked at Ivy. What do you want? She thought for a moment, then said, I want to see my mother's letters, and I want to thank the staff. They were kind to me, even when I was difficult. But then I want to go home, as soon as possible. Then that's what we'll do. The next 3 days were a blur of paperwork and preparation. Dennison proved incredibly efficient, cutting through red tape with the authority of a man who'd spent decades navigating legal complexities. He arranged for telegrams to Judge Farrow, prepared guardianship documents, and ensured the trust fund was properly established with Calder as Ivy's legal guardian and trustee. This money is for Ivy's future, Dennison explained as Calder reviewed the documents. Education, opportunities, whatever she needs. But it's also yours to use if emergencies arise or if you need to improve your circumstances to better care for her. Mr. Ashford wanted to help, not to burden you with pride. Calder nodded, still struggling to accept it. $50,000 was more money than he could imagine. It meant security. It meant Ivy could go to school if she wanted, could choose her own path without being limited by poverty. I'll use it wisely, he promised. I don't doubt it. Mr. Ashford's assessment of your character was quite thorough. He had investigators look into your background. I hope you don't mind. They reported that you're respected in your community, that you've worked hard your entire life, and that the townspeople near your home spoke of you with admiration. One widow named Paulson said, and I quote, "Calder Boone is the finest man I know, and that child is blessed to have found him." Calder's throat tightened. I'm the one who's blessed. Meanwhile, Ivy spent time going through the things her grandfather had left her. The staff had gathered them in the library, a small trunk containing her mother's letters, some jewelry, photographs, and a journal Clara had kept as a young woman. Ivy read the letters with tears streaming down her face, learning about the mother she barely remembered. Clara had written about falling in love with Ivy's father, about the joy of pregnancy, about dreams for her daughter's future. There was pain there, too, the heartbreak of being disowned, the struggle of poverty, the fear that she'd made a terrible mistake. But through it all ran a thread of defiant love. I chose this life, Clara had written in one letter, dated just months before her death. I chose love over money, freedom over security, joy over comfort, and I would choose it again. I pray Ivy will have the courage to choose the same when her time comes, to follow her heart rather than expectations. That's the only legacy that matters. Ivy showed the letter to Calder that night as they sat in the estate's garden, away from prying eyes. She would have liked you, Ivy said quietly. Mama, she would have been glad I found you. I would have liked her too, Calder said. She raised a remarkable daughter in the short time she had. I wish grandfather had known this when she was alive. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe, but we can't change the past. We can only choose what we do with the time we have left. Ivy leaned against his shoulder. I choose Montana. I choose you. I choose home. Good, because that's exactly where we're going. Gitsan, on the fourth day they said their goodbyes. The household staff gathered in the main foyer, Mrs. Pemberton, the cook, the maids, the groundskeeper. They'd prepared a small farewell tea, which surprised Ivy to tears. We know you weren't happy here, Mrs. Pemberton said, her stern demeanor finally cracking. But you brought light to this house. Mr. Ashford smiled more in these past months than he had in years. You reminded him what mattered. For that, we're grateful. Thank you for being kind to me, Ivy said, hugging the housekeeper. I know I wasn't the easiest charge. You were honest. There's value in that. Mrs. Pemberton pressed a small package into Ivy's hands. From all of us. For your journey. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of writing instruments. For recording your adventures, the cook said with a smile. Every good story deserves to be written down. Ivy hugged them all, and Calder shook hands with each staff member, thanking them for caring for his daughter when he couldn't. Then finally, they were in a carriage heading to the train station. Ivy watched Philadelphia disappear behind them, the massive buildings and crowded streets giving way to open sky. She didn't look sad. She looked relieved. No regrets? Calder asked. Not one, she said firmly. I learned things here. About my mother. About myself. About what matters. But I'm ready to go home now. Really home. At the station, Dennison met them one final time to hand over the last of the paperwork. Judge Farrow will receive all of this within the week, he said. The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, but it's a formality at this point. With Mr. Ashford's withdrawal and recommendation, there's no opposition to your guardianship. Thank you, Calder said, shaking his hand, for everything. Thank Mr. Ashford. He may have started down the wrong path, but he found his way back in the end. That takes courage. Dennison smiled at Ivy. Take care of your father, young lady. He's crossed the country twice for you. I will, Ivy promised. They boarded the train, found their seats, and as the whistle blew and the locomotive began to move, Ivy pressed her face to the window and waved until Dennison was just a speck in the distance. Then she settled back against Calder's shoulder with a contented sigh. How long until we're home? 4 days, give or take. I can't wait. Neither could Calder. E.K. The journey back to Montana felt like the opposite of every trip before it. Where there had been anxiety and grief, now there was peace and anticipation. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was certainty. They talked for hours during the journey. Ivy told him stories about her tutors, the French teacher who'd made her conjugate verbs until her head ached, the piano teacher who'd rapped her knuckles when she hit wrong notes, the etiquette instructor who'd despaired of ever teaching her proper posture. I tried, Ivy said with a laugh. But every time I sat up straight in those fancy dresses, I just thought about how much easier it was to move in my old clothes. How much simpler everything was at the cabin. We'll get you new clothes, Calder said. Practical ones. Whatever you need. Can I keep the journal Mrs. Pemberton gave me? Of course, it's yours. And the wooden horse you gave me? That too. And can we plant more wildflowers when we get back? We'll plant a whole field if you want. Ivy grinned, then grew serious. Pa, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think you'll ever get married again? Have more children? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. You should, Ivy said matter-of-factly. You're a good father, and you deserve to be happy. I wouldn't mind having brothers or sisters someday. Calder's chest tightened with affection. Let's just focus on us for now. We've got plenty of time to figure out the rest. Okay, she yawned, the rhythm of the train making her drowsy. But I meant it. You deserve good things. I have good things, Calder said, putting his arm around her. I have you. She fell asleep like that, tucked against his side, and Calder watched the landscape roll past, mountains giving way to plains giving way to mountains again, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. They arrived in Billings on a bright morning in late April. Spring had fully arrived in Montana. The air was warm, the sky impossibly blue, and wildflowers were beginning to dot the hillsides. Calder had sent a telegram ahead to Reverend Michaels, so he wasn't surprised to find a small welcoming committee waiting at the station. Tom Bridger was there, looking gruff and pleased. Widow Paulson had brought fresh bread. Even Mrs. Chen from the trading post had come, carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Welcome home, Ivy, the widow said, pulling her into a hug. We've missed you. I've missed you too. Ivy was beaming, hugging everyone in turn. Mrs. Chen pressed her package into Ivy's hands. More flower seeds. For your garden. Thank you. I'll plant them today. Tom clapped Calder on the shoulder. You did it, you stubborn bastard. You actually did it. We did it, Calder corrected. All of us. Reverend Michaels was smiling broadly. Judge Farrow received the documents from Philadelphia. The hearing's scheduled for next week, but he's already indicated he'll approve the guardianship. You've won, Calder. Calder looked at Ivy, who was laughing with Widow Paulson about something, her face bright with joy, and thought, yes, we have. They loaded into Tom's wagon for the 12-mile journey to the cabin. Ivy sat between Calder and Tom, talking nonstop about everything she wanted to do: plant the garden, see clover, check on the chickens, read her primer, make candles that weren't crooked. I want to do everything, she said. I want to remember what it feels like to just be me again. When the cabin finally came into view, Ivy gasped. Someone, probably Reverend Michaels and the townspeople, had prepared it for their return. The porch had been swept, the windows cleaned, fresh firewood stacked. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning someone had lit the fire. And in the garden plot Ivy had planted before leaving, green shoots were pushing through the soil. The wildflowers, Ivy breathed. They grew. Calder, they actually grew. She jumped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped and ran to the garden, kneeling in the dirt and touching the tiny plants with reverent fingers. They waited for me, she said, tears in her eyes, just like you said they would. Calder knelt beside her. Everything waited for you, including me. Ivy threw her arms around him, and they stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling in the dirt beside growing things, while the people who'd supported them watched with quiet satisfaction. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. We'll give you two some space, but Calder, we're having a celebration dinner at the church tomorrow night. Everyone wants to welcome Ivy home properly. We'll be there, Calder promised. After they left, Calder and Ivy stood on the porch, looking out at the mountains. It's exactly how I remembered it, Ivy said softly. Every single detail. Your palette's still by the fire, your spoon's still on the table, your primer's still on the shelf. You didn't move anything? Couldn't. It would have felt like giving up. Ivy slipped her hand into his. I'm home, Pa. Really home. And I'm never leaving again. You might someday. When you're grown, when you want to see the world, then I'll come back. This will always be home. You'll always be home. They went inside together, and the cabin wrapped around them like an embrace. Ivy immediately started touching things. The table, the fireplace, the rocking chair, her primer, reacquainting herself with the life she'd left behind. That night, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread that tasted better than any fancy Philadelphia meal, Ivy asked if they could sit on the porch like they used to. They wrapped themselves in blankets against the evening chill and watched stars emerge one by one. Pa? Ivy said after a while. Yeah? Tell me about Lily and Rose again. I want to know everything. So Calder talked. About his first family, the daughters he'd lost, the wife who'd made him promise not to let the cold take him. He talked about grief and healing and the long years of solitude. Do you think they'd mind? Ivy asked quietly. That you love me now? That I'm here in their place? You're not in their place, sweetheart. You're in your own place. And yes, I think they'd be happy. I think Mary would be glad I kept my promise. I think the girls would have loved having you as a sister. I wish I could have known them. In a way, you do. They're part of what made me who I am, part of what taught me how to be a father. Without them, I might not have recognized what you needed when you walked out of that grass asking for scraps. Ivy was quiet for a moment, then said, Can I tell you something? Anything. I used to be scared that loving you meant forgetting my real pa, the one who died in the mine. But I don't think it works that way. I think maybe we can love lots of people, and it doesn't make any of it less real. I think you're right. So I love him, and I love you, and neither one makes the other less true. Calder pulled her close. That's exactly right. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. They sat in comfortable silence until Ivy started yawning. Calder sent her to bed, and she climbed into her pallet by the fire with a contented sigh. Good night, Pa. Good night, Ivy. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Welcome home. He stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to her breathing even out, watching the stars wheel overhead. The mountains rose dark against the sky, eternal and unchanging. But everything else had changed, everything that mattered. The hearing the following week was brief and decisive. Judge Farrow reviewed the documents from Philadelphia, heard brief testimony from Calder and Ivy, and signed the guardianship papers without hesitation. This is one of the easier decisions I've made, he said, smiling at them. Calder Boone, you are hereby granted full legal guardianship of Ivy Hale. Congratulations to you both. The courtroom, packed with townspeople who'd come to support them, erupted in applause. Ivy hugged Calder so hard he could barely breathe, and when they finally left the courthouse, walking down the steps into sunshine, they did so as an official family, not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love that had survived impossible odds. Summer came to Montana in waves of warmth and color. The wildflowers Ivy had planted bloomed in brilliant profusion, yellows and purples and reds covering the yard like a quilt. She tended them daily, talking to them as she worked, telling them stories about Philadelphia and the journey home. She learned to read fluently that summer, devouring every book Calder could find. She learned to ride Clover with confidence, to shoot a rifle for hunting, to preserve vegetables for winter. She grew stronger, taller, more sure of herself. But more than that, she grew happy. The nightmares that had plagued her in Philadelphia, dreams of being trapped in fancy dresses, of forgetting Calder's face, of being lost in crowds, faded away. In their place came dreams of growing things, of mountains and starlight, of home. Calder changed too. The hardness that had defined him for so long softened. He laughed more easily, spoke more freely, engaged more fully with the community. He and Ivy became fixtures at church gatherings, town celebrations, harvest festivals. People stopped calling him the hermit and started calling him Ivy's Pa with warm affection. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk, Ivy said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "The money, the trust fund." Calder tensed slightly. They hadn't talked much about Silas Ashford's gift, though Calder had used a small portion to buy supplies and make improvements to the cabin. "What about it?" "I want to use some of it to fix up the cabin. Make it bigger. Add a real bedroom for me so you can have the loft back. Maybe add a room for guests, too, in case we ever want to have people stay." "You sure?" "That money's for your future, your education." "This is my future," Ivy interrupted. "Right here. I'm not saying I'll never leave or never go to school. Maybe someday I will. But for now, this is where I want to be, and I want to make it better. Make it ours. Both of ours." Calder studied her, this fierce, wise, remarkable girl who'd walked out of the wilderness and saved his life. "All right," he said. "We'll do it together." They spent the fall and winter expanding the cabin. With help from Tom Bridger and other men from town, they added 2 rooms, a proper bedroom for Ivy with windows facing the mountains, and a guest room that could double as storage. They reinforced the porch, built better furniture, even installed a small wood stove in Ivy's room so she'd be warm through Montana winters. Ivy designed flower beds along every wall, planning for spring. And through it all, they worked side by side, building not just a house, but a home, a future, a life, a set. The following spring, on the anniversary of the day Ivy had first walked into Calder's life, they held a small celebration. Reverend Michaels came, as did Tom Bridger, Widow Paulson, Mrs. Chen, and several other townspeople who'd become friends. They gathered in the cabin, now spacious enough to hold them all comfortably, and shared food and stories and laughter. At one point, Reverend Michaels raised his cup and said, "I'd like to propose a toast. To Calder and Ivy, a family built not on blood or law, but on the truest foundation of all, love freely given and gratefully received. May your home always be filled with this kind of grace." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused. After the guests had left and the cabin was quiet again, Ivy and Calder sat on the porch in their customary spots, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. "Happy anniversary," Ivy said. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart." "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If I hadn't walked up to your cabin that day? If you'd sent me away?" "All the time," Calder admitted. "And every time I thank God you were brave enough to ask, and that I was smart enough to say yes." "I wasn't brave, I was desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing." Ivy smiled, then said, "I wrote to Grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Dennison. I wanted to tell him how we're doing." "What did you say?" "That I'm happy, that I'm home, that I think Grandfather would be glad he did the right thing in the end, even if it took him too long to figure it out." She paused. "I also thanked him for loving my mother, even if he didn't know how to show it, for trying with me, even though it was hard, and for being brave enough to let me go when he realized I didn't belong there. That was kind of you. You taught me that people are complicated, that they can make terrible mistakes and still deserve grace." Calder looked at this remarkable young woman, because she was becoming that now, growing into someone extraordinary, and felt pride swell in his chest. "You're going to do great things, Ivy Hale." "Maybe. But whatever I do, I'll always come back here. To you. To home." "I know." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The wildflowers they'd planted together swayed in the evening breeze, filling the air with sweetness. Inside the cabin, firelight glowed warm and golden through the windows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Clover nickered softly in her stall. The mountains stood eternal against the horizon, witness to everything that had passed and everything yet to come. "Pa?" Ivy said sleepily. "Yeah? I'm glad I found you. I'm glad you found me too, sweetheart. No more fear? No more fear. No more uncertainty. No more uncertainty. Just home? Just home, Calder confirmed. Forever. Ivy smiled and leaned against his shoulder, and Calder wrapped his arm around her, holding close the miracle that had walked out of the Montana wilderness and taught him how to live again. Two lost souls who'd found each other in the loneliest corner of the world, a mountain man and a little girl, a father and a daughter. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love that had survived impossible odds and emerged stronger for it. Under the vast Montana sky, in a cabin that was no longer a tomb but a sanctuary, they sat together, not waiting for anything anymore, not hoping for anything more. Just being, just belonging, just home. And that was enough. That was everything.